Hi, my name is Nate. I run Jesus People SF. Does it matter whether Martin Luther King Jr. was a Christian? And maybe to some extent, was he a Christian? The reason I'm asking this question is because of a rather fiery tweet by Christianity Today, which a lot of the Christian nationalist kind of camp people decided to respond to on Christian Twitter here, as it's called anyway. The actual article is by a gentleman named Justin Giboni, if I'm saying that name right. And it's got a little picture there you can see. The question was raised by Dr. John MacArthur. And MacArthur was, just to set up the story, he was asked a question about, some of his old fellows with an organization he used to partner with, Together for the Gospel, and their kind of reverencing of Dr. Martin Luther King and basically just treating him as a Christian. And there's a lot of evidence that's come out in the decades since Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated that talk about a life that was not super Christian as far as his behavior. And I guess the first, one of the reasons to talk about this is well, it does matter, who we laud as Christian heroes. But on the other hand, I want to ask a question. I want to get into this article because the article basically says, yes, Martin Luther King Jr. was a Christian because he was a man of justice. But number one, if we establish, for instance, that Martin Luther King Jr. had a general desire for justice for people who had black skin or brown skin. And, if we just establish that, whether he was or was not a Christian, aside from that, does it really matter? So in any case, in this article by Justin Giboni, which I believe when I was a member of Sojourn Midtown in Louisville, I believe he came and spoke. He's one of those people that likes to encourage political engagement, but mostly from a center-left or far-left position. And so he basically says that, going back to this tweet really quick, look at what their argumentation is for why Martin Luther King Jr. was Christian. Because they want to establish that he is Christian, and this is the heart of their reason for it. They say because Martin Luther King Jr. was a man of justice. So the fact that Martin Luther King Jr. had a general principle of justice and wanted to stand for it, this is the ground they say that he was a Christian. But this is kind of concerning because if I run a red light or something and hit a car and go to court, I would hope that the judge, whether he's Christian or atheist or Muslim or Buddhist or whatever, would have a general principle of justice, right? That's God's gift to man. That's what we would call theologically common grace, because it's common to all peoples and cultures and religions. You don't necessarily need to be a Christian to do the right thing generally, right? On a human level, at least. But to establish some kind of argumentation where Martin Luther King is Christian because he had an outer kind of Christian-y walk, plus he was a man of justice, I don't think is enough to establish someone's Christianity being true. So in this article here, Justin Giboni basically says that, look, here King has a prophetic dream. You know who else had a prophetic dream? Pharaoh in the days of Joseph. Nebuchadnezzar in the days of Daniel. I mean, having a prophecy, even a prophecy that's true, doesn't necessarily make you a part of the fold, right? And to bring that argument further, both Nebuchadnezzar and Pharaoh had a part to play in God's work on the earth, which would be a reason why God would give them a prophetic word. And furthermore, I would argue Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a role to play in God's work on the earth. I think equalizing the treatment of people of different races and things like that is a good thing. And he had a big role to play. And he's rightly lauded for that regard. But the question today is not whether King did anything good for the races of America and maybe the world, but the question is whether he was a Christian. And so he has this prophetic dream, apparently. And here is MacArthur talking about whether he is indeed a Christian. And so this controversy basically hinges not based on King's reputation as someone who successfully fought for equal treatment under the law for people of all races, but whether he was a genuine Christian. And just scrolling down here, it seems that the whole argumentation of this article, you can read it for yourself, I can link to it, is that King has a Christian-y desire for justice. He has a general hunger for equal treatment of humans. You know, today, I was reading kind of an intro book on philosophy. And it was talking about Socrates and his sort of deathbed, or, you know, his trial that led him to be killed for teaching the youth of Athens. And it's very interesting. Socrates, to my knowledge, never confessed the God of Judaism, which was the true religion at the time. That was the most current thing God was doing on the earth, was Judaism. I don't see him saying that, but he had the option to be exiled, but he said, no, I'm not going to be exiled. I'm going to stand on my principles here. I'm going to stand on my conscience, and I will take this hemlock stuff, basically the death sentence, and I'm doing this because I believe God has commanded it. And to be honest, common grace would say the Gentiles in that season obeying their conscience, at least in some respect, maybe not an ultimate justification respect, but to some respect is what God expected of them. So should we say Socrates, such a good Christian because he was a man of justice? He stood on his conscience. Should we Christianize Socrates because he obeyed his conscience and had a general rule of thumb that he followed about justice? No. This is, as Jesus says in the Gospels, when you've done everything that's expected of you, you're just doing what's already expected. You haven't exceeded the standard. So, just because Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was generally a nice dude, because generally on a human horizon, like an x-axis horizon, not a horizontal y-axis horizon, but on a horizontal horizon, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did the right thing, but that doesn't make him Christian. This brings up another kind of concern because in the early 20th century, there was this new movement among so-called Christians called the social gospel. And this was before the days of, quote, social justice. This was a social gospel. And this was generally the sense that if you were a good person, if you treated your neighbor well, you generally, in some sense, a very squishy and not very exacting standard, obeyed the Ten Commandments, that you were a Christian and that you should just do good to your neighbor. And this is the Christian thing to do. I'm afraid that in evangelicalism, on the side that is more left of center politically, where the ideas of social justice have overtaken the idea of biblical justice, that the same principle of the social gospel has come in. All you got to do is justice. All you have to do is treat your neighbor well, which any Hindu, Buddhist, anybody can help a lady across the street. You don't need the gospel for that. The gospel is to make yourself right with God. It's not to necessarily to change anything about your relations with men unless it's totally screwed. I mean, even the Bible lays out a principle. The person who's in the fold who mistreats their own kindred is worse than an unbeliever. Why? Because even unbelievers treat their kindred well, and that could go for their countrymen. So, I mean, the Bible expects even the pagans to treat each other well. The Bible knows that, in fact, many times they do, but that doesn't make them Christian. It doesn't make them holy. So I don't really care what you think about Dr. Martin Luther King as far as did he generally do just things toward men. Like, I don't care. I personally think he did. But the question that I think is really important is, what is a Christian? And if doing justice is the definition of being a Christian, then dude, you no longer have Christianity. You just have this moralism that God has already given the nations. God has already given every person who's born a conscience, right? You don't need the gospel just to obey your conscience. So the premise of this Christianity Today article and tweet, where King is a Christian and it's an incontrovertible statement to say Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Christian on the basis that he treated people justly or advocated for justice or advocated for the poor. None of these things in themselves make you Christian. Now, I would hope that Christians would vouch for equal treatment of the races under the law. I would hope that Christians vouch for the poor. I myself am a social worker in my day job. So, I mean, I do these things on my own. That's why I became a social worker, was to help specifically the homeless. But just advocating for the homeless, just being a social worker, doesn't make you Christian. It's not going to vindicate you before God. Remember, the Bible calls even good works dead works. The only works that you will ever get to share in the glory of are works that God himself was doing through you if you had been converted by faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ and the Son of God and what God has spoken. So let's not muddy the waters so that, Christians will want to do justice. Like, as far as the author, Justin Giboney, I hope that you won't muddy the waters of what a Christian is just so that people will want to treat their neighbor well. I don't think you can say those two things follow from one another. I'm happy that you would want to defend King's legacy, but the argumentation you use to defend King as a Christian isn't anything that Paul would use, period. It's just not. Because Paul would say, have you repented of your sins? Have you trusted Christ for salvation? And given that you have made these introductory kind of things to be a Christian, do you walk in light of Christ's commands? Jesus says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? So anyone who genuinely, in other words, has Christ as Lord, does obey what he says. That's all I got to say today. Hit the like and subscribe button if indeed this was helpful to you. This is going to be just a way for YouTube to share this video. Have a good day. Bye.